to introduce to us how they are sort of feeling about being in a public interest technology degree and what their perhaps day job responsibilities might be in that intersection. Over to you, Toby.
Sure, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to gather together with you all virtually and talk a little bit about my journey to public interest technology and this program. I, as a young kid in the 80s, I loved programming my Commodore 64 and going to computer camp. I was a total geek. And after college, I ended up working in the nonprofit social service sector with a bunch of people who are completely afraid of technology. So I was the accidental techie, as they call it in the nonprofit world, right? People would say, the computer's broken, please fix it. Or, you know, design a database for us, or whatever else needed to happen that wasn't even in my job description. And, you know, back then in the late 90s, we had a single dial-up connection for our whole office that we shared, and we checked our email like once a day. The world is so different now, right? But in terms of my own origins, it really goes back into my family. My father was an anthropologist who called himself an unfrocked anthropologist because he had fled the racism and colonialism of his anthropology program in the 1950s. And he raised me on Marshall McLuhan and quantum physics and the Gaia hypothesis and visiting Arcosanti there up north from Phoenix. He was fascinated by the future of technology and society, and I've inherited his library. So I have these copies of like War and Peace in the Global Village, The Human Use of Human Beings, about cybernetics, right? The Limits of Growth, and first editions of Galertner and Negroponte, like sitting on my shelf that I inherited from him. So these questions aren't just for my own interest in my own life, they're what I have inherited as that legacy. He really taught me that the way that we ask questions shapes the answers that we find. And I think that's crucial to the way that we live in this information oversaturated society now. And how I've taken that into my own day job, how I've taken that into my work. I mentioned that I drifted into the nonprofit social service world. I started doing work in the anti-rape movement in the late 90s. And in 2003, I met Cindy Southworth, who had founded this project at the intersection of gender-based violence and technology. So we look at everything from communication technology used for harassment, location tracking, sharing images, big data and the impact that it has for victims of gender-based violence, and more recently, the Internet of Things, right? So my work is talking to community-based advocates who don't understand the technology, or even people in legal systems, law enforcement, judges, who also like know that it's important, but don't really get how it works. And so often we say that technology can be used for good, it can be used for ill, it's just a tool, but I've had a sense, and it's really been confirmed just in the first 3 weeks of my time in the PIT program, that technology is not neutral. It causes fundamental changes in individuals and societies. It allows us to reach further, to remember more, to move faster, and to break even bigger things in more lasting ways. And so tech is what we do with it, but the way we design it, the way we develop it, can accelerate and magnify harms. Or maybe, just maybe, it can promote the ways of being and relationships and futures that we want to create as we're able to gather together like we are right now, right? So I know that there's a lot of good intentions in people who get involved in technology. I've met these folks in the privacy world. I've met technologists who just want to do good. And when they hear about the work that I do, they're like, thank you so much. I could never do that. How can I help you? But I've seen those same developers and companies from the best of intentions design, you know, apps and tech that not only aren't as effective as they could be, but sometimes even increase harm. And to me, that's why I came into the PIT program, because the design and deployment of technology needs to serve society, and it needs to serve the most vulnerable in society. It needs to be inclusive of those perspectives in design and development, but it also needs to be inclusive of the people, right? The people who are using it. Most people don't understand how the tech that they're using every day works. And they don't understand how that technology is using them. And so we can talk about disparities in access. We can say there's this digital divide, right? And it is a digital divide to access, but really that's like a consumer focus, right? It's like, why don't more people buy more things? Really what we need is access to technology and the rooms in which it's designed, because that's not evenly distributed, as William Gibson would say, right? We need to drive the processes to open up from the development side, and we also need to make technology understandable to lay people, to everyday people. So what are my first impressions now that I've been here for 3 whole weeks in the public interest technology program? I have found what I wanted. I just thought, where has this been the past 20 years of my life? I was looking for a focused and stimulating learning community where I can systematically explore the social impacts of technology, gain skills in co-design. I want more discipline in how I think. Oftentimes I myself am moving fast to react to new trends and how they're affecting people in a very real way. But I want to be able to dig into the theory, but it has to be applicable. I need both sides of that coin, and I've found that so far in the program. So I want to know, how technologists can meaningfully engage communities and how communities can push for change and technology development themselves. I want to know how we can use these technologies to inform policy and society to drive racial and gender and climate justice while we're also protecting privacy. And I want to know how all these different players and levels can work together, like what those roles are. So I am just so thrilled to be a part of this program and really honored to be a part of this group today and to hear more of what everyone else has to share about their own journeys and aims and goals.
Thank you so much, Toby. We're equally as honored to have you in our program. Every piece of correspondence I get from you, I feel like I need to give equally in terms of depth and length. I'm always going, where did this student come from? Where did this amazing brain come from to come to us? And for us, it's equally, we're learning equally from you as we're going along. I mean, the questions you're looking at, location-based services and regulation and tracking of women, the use of technology in domestic violence, but also to support women who are survivors of domestic violence or in the process of being victims of domestic violence. How can we use this technology to support us, but also to be cognizant of all that's going on with regards to the privacy of the individual? Who has the upper hand? Jumana Bugazela talked about the power of tech and the disproportionate power, but you speak to so many topics, bringing cross-disciplinarity together. It's not just one area. Your day job is constantly thinking about everything at once. Do you see yourself going into academia in the future? Do you see yourself progressing in your work where you are at the moment and putting forward new technologies or new ideas or new regulation proposals?
It's a wonderful question. And like I said, I think it's both, like I want the theory and it has to be applicable. I have a tremendous intellectual curiosity that I perhaps inherited from my dad, but to me, and I think for him too, like it had to mean something. He left academia because of how closed the environment was, 70 years ago. And so I had always thought I would love to be part of academia, love to be a professor. And the world seemed too closed off to me. It did not seem transdisciplinary enough. It did not seem applicable enough. And I think that is part of my excitement in finding ASU and the College of Global Futures is to say, this is a place where I could do that. This is a style of thinking and meeting people from so many other institutions, really through your connections and the way that you're weaving us all together makes me excited for that future as well.
Toby, I'm going to skip Charlene for a second, Charlene. I hope you don't seem, there's a reason why. Elma Hajric, are you online?
I'm here.
Elma, what do you feel about what Toby's talking about? You've gone through the Masters in Science and Technology Policy. You're now in the PhD program and you have an emphasis on privacy and more precisely, I would say, data ownership. How do you feel about responding to, like, almost as a discussion to Toby's discussion?
I'm taking it all in, but I think it's an interesting perspective. I think she's more closely paired to the actual technologies being deployed and sort of the more realistic, tangible focus on privacy. My research is more gearing towards ownership after having the Master's of Science and Technology policy to explore the regulatory landscape. I became fascinated with all of the gaps in the regulations with relating to privacy. But when I threw in all of the emerging technologies that were just being explored a little bit further, I started questioning whether we should be focusing on privacy so much, or whether we should also incorporate other elements of data governance into the mix, especially with ownership and biometrics. That's kind of where I am.
And the program you're involved in now is a NRT, a National Research Training, NSF, National Science Foundation Fellowship with your PhD, and it's on smart cities. How does your work on privacy and data ownership come together with smart cities?
So I'm really getting to explore a new perspective on all of the things that I explored in my master's program with data ownership and privacy. Specifically, I think more with surveillance and all of the technology that's being deployed for specific use cases, not being taken at face value for those use cases. They always have a secondary purpose with the data collection. And there's massive, massive amounts of data being collected in smart city contexts that I'm still exploring how that's going to be regulated. How are we going to claim ownership over facial recognition everywhere, or biometrics everywhere? Where do we meet those boundaries between the government, the corporate sector, and the people? And the NRT really allows me to be the people-focused lens to looking at data ownership.
Elma, what is your background and how did you end up navigating after an industry stint into science and tech policy and then towards the PhD? Did you think you'd go that way?
No. So my background, my undergrad is in international relations. Originally, I'm from Bosnia and I came to the United States as a refugee. So I had a human rights interest. And after college, I volunteered with Amnesty International for a few years, where I really became aware of surveillance issues, specifically with police body cameras, and started questioning, how do we opt out of being surveilled all the time? Like, what if someone's at a protest and they happen to have a sensitive status or are a survivor of domestic abuse and they're photographed and suddenly it blows up on Facebook and it's viral and you're everywhere. Wondering how to navigate that. And that led me, I knew I would go back for a master's degree. That led me to focus on the science and technology research. I did work as tech support during my undergrad, kind of the accidental techie as well. But yeah, I explored it further in my master's research, and then recognizing that I just kept unraveling more and more questions rather than answers. And I was like, I need more time researching this. And I really felt like I had something to grasp onto with the ownership and the constantly new emerging technologies that seem to be more and more intrusive, invasive, and wondering how the future is going to grapple with that.
So what I love here is that Toby has identified a need. You know, when I've been looking at location-based services and looking at how it may be used for or against women, and then Elma, you're actually doing that research in a smart city context. Not exactly, it's a periphery, but you can see that you've met a fellow collaborator. You know, there's potential there to keep talking, you know, not through colloquiums, even though ASU Online is a remote sort of degree, you're doing it online in your own time, asynchronously, you can actually have that conduit for discussion. That's what I want to establish here. That's the community of practice. Nicole Stevenson made a wonderful remark. I don't know if you're able to talk. This is a difficult time for you, Nicole, I know, in the morning in Brisbane. But she says, Toby's work is hugely relevant for legislative reviews that are looking at impacts of tech and platforms on vulnerable groups. And we've mentioned this notion of vulnerable groups, underrepresented minority groups now many times today, which is again a recurring theme coming out. Elma, have you visualized yet? I know it's right at the beginning of your PhD, where you might go to from here.
Right now, this may change, but right now I do think that I'm looking for the professor track, the academic track, to continue this research, because I don't think that it will ever stop.
I really love that. Let's see. There is a young man online. I'm going to call him young. Hey, Jason Sargent. I don't know if you can talk, but Jason was in my first class at the University of Wollongong that I ever taught as a 24 or 25-year-old now. And I saw an amazing capacity in this young person who was in front of me. And I asked if I could use one of his essays in submission to a textbook that was being published, and he said yes. I think that was a good, fair paycheck for a university student at the time. But he's now teaching at Swinburne University and researching and putting forward so many wonderful things. But this is the thing, we have to believe in each other, because the more people that graduate with degrees like this and are also in academia, equally as they are in NGOs or in consulting, in industry, this is how we are able to influence the world together. I really think this is a movement. It's not just a degree. When you talk to the New America Foundation, they don't say public interest tech is just a single degree. Yes, ASU is very fortunate to have created the first named public interest technology degree, but in fact, it is science and technology policy, it is human and social dimensions, it is innovation in global development, all the things that we're looking forward to in the new College of Global Futures. Thank you, Elma, for sharing. I'm going to go to Charlene now. Charlene, you come from a different angle. I mean, I always look at your profile and I think, how is this guy doing a master's? He sort of could be teaching me. Could you tell us more about what you do?
Oh, thanks so much, Katina, and so great to join you all today. Really excited to be speaking with you all. I'll just give a little bit of an overview on my background and sort of what drew me to this really exciting program. So hi, everyone. I'm Shaylin. I'm based in Washington, D.C. I'm a strategist, a researcher, and a writer at the intersection of higher ed, workforce development, and public interest technology, as I like to say, or innovation policy is the other sort of name that I find myself in. And by day, I work at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, where I work with public research universities just like ASU to better understand how we can maximize the social, cultural, economic value of our teaching, research, and service missions of universities. My background is actually in science and tech policy, and I was initially accepted to ASU as an MSTP student. I don't know if Andrew Maynard is on the line, but I was so excited to begin the MSTP. But come April, I got word that ASU was launching a new master's in public interest technology, and I had a conversation with Katina, and immediately we had, I think, a 2-hour-long conversation of what was going to be initially 30 minutes, and I was sold. I knew that this was the right program for me. Before I came to APLU, I was a researcher at the University of Michigan. I contributed to the second edition of Beyond Sputnik, which is a book on science policy. I was on the science and tech policy team at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I did consulting work in various spaces. And I also, outside of my day role, serve as the CEO of the Journal of Science, Policy, and Governance, which I highly recommend you all consider submitting to. For 10 years, JSPG has been a vehicle to elevate and uplift the voices of early career researchers in every dimension of science and technology policy debate. Shameless plug, David Gustin of ASU and Sylvester Johnson of Virginia Tech and our team at JSPG, we are organizing a webinar with New America's Public Interest Technology Network around an issue that we launched with the United Nations earlier this summer. I'm actually just going to drop the link in the chat in case anyone's interested, but it was around emerging technologies and its impact on inequities and sustainable development, which was a direct response to the UN's request for early career voices to contribute to this dialogue. The issue that you see linked in the chat was actually featured before the UN Commission on Science and Technology for Development. So if you're interested, we have a call for submissions out. November is the deadline. Highly encourage you all to submit your policy memos, tech assessments, your manuscripts for submission. All right, now I'm off my soapbox. What really drew me to this program at ASU was the level of transdisciplinary and the flexibility it allows. I was so struck by Tamir's presentation, and I just wanted to give another sort of plug. For those of you in the MS and PIT program or even MSTP, I'm actually also pursuing coursework in the Cronkite School for Journalism on digital audience strategy. And I found this program to be so extraordinarily rewarding and remunerative for my work, regardless of whether we're selling products, designing products, selling ideas, developing ideas. We want to be heard, and we want our voices to be heard. And digital audience engagement, I think, is so great. So shout out for the DAS. They have a certificate program that fits very nicely in the MS. That level of flexibility is what drew me to ASU. I've had the privilege of working with more than 1,000 universities around the world in my role at APLU and the American Academy, and I really, really believe that there's no place like the New American University. There's no place like ASU in terms of the ability to innovate and think out of the box. So that's what drew me here. I'm so excited to be a student in this program and really grateful for your leadership, Katina, of this program. I continue to be amazed of your support of students wherever we are in the world. So I'll pause there, and looking forward to further conversations.
Thank you so much, Charlene. What an amazing territory you covered. A plug for your journal again. I saw the call. I actually went to the link just a moment ago. It's peer-reviewed, correct?
That's correct.
Excellent. So that's a wonderful opportunity. We have a co-editor of the IEEE Transactions on Technology and Society. I mean, these outlets are really great outlets for our PhD students and master students to publish in, our faculty who are related to PIT, anti-MSTP, the Science and Technology Policy. We've got Eusebio Skornavacha, who asked a question of Tamir before regarding the podcast series, but he's a co-editor as well. Jason Sargent, an associate editor in the same outlet. So we've got a lot of people here with editorial experience where I think we should be able to target necessary things. I really liked when we first spoke, Charlene, how future-oriented you are. I mean, if I could just broadly say, we were talking about the blockchain in education, and you did my head in, because I was thinking now, how could we corroborate this? But you're like miles ahead in that specific area. What do you see? What is going to change in education?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. You know, I think there's sort of two dimensions for this. I am really excited by the blockchain space. Right now, there's this movement called LERs, Learning and Employment Records, which are really trying to redefine how we know what one knows and how we signal that. Let's do a test. Drop in the chat the letter A if you've ever seen a job where you know you're qualified for it, but you haven't had the needed credential or you haven't had the needed years of experience. Let's see. Let's do an experiment. Yeah, all of us, right? So for me, what's really exciting is blockchain technology and interoperable learning records are really catalyzing higher education and the employer community to think about how we go about codifying knowledge, skills, and abilities and signaling them out to employers so that we can build more equitable, more efficient, and more successful pathways to and from education and work. I'll drop another link in the chat that speaks to this in a bit more detail, but something that's really top of mind for me right now is if we develop any sort of technology infrastructure that could potentially replace our resumes, our cover letters, the documents that we use to tell somebody, here's what I know and here's what I can do, with a system that really is grounded in verification and interoperability across systems and institutions, how can we make sure that those systems and those who are in a position to verify, be it education institutions or employers, are doing so in a systematic and equitable way? There's so many things I could plug right now, but I'm getting a little bit worried about being too promotional. So I'll just leave it at that comment, Katina, and I will just drop a link in the chat. In September 2019, the White House released a report, the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board, on interoperable learning records. And that report, APLU, the Chamber of Commerce here in the US, all of these organizations and ecosystem players have really been kind of taking a step back and thinking, how can we move to a system by which technology can build out fairer pathways to and from education and work? This report really goes into a bit more detail on that, so I'll drop it in the chat box.
Thank you, and we'll have to invite you back to give a specific seminar. I'm going to go now to a young man who's in the Smart City Infrastructure and Technology course. He's a systems engineer, Yati Shetty. I'm wondering if you might talk to us a little bit about the course you're currently doing and how it's been interesting to have students from the Human and Social Dimensions PhD course with you in the same class. So you're a systems engineer by training. We have software engineers in that course, and we have others who are philosophers, even a person with a religious studies background, but also human and social dimensions. Yati, I'm not sure if you're available to talk, but what are you thinking in terms of the course at the moment?
Yeah. Hi, Katina.
Hi, Yati. Yes, we can.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's been actually a great experience for me. I've never been in a class with so many people from different backgrounds, which are not engineers. I've been an engineer all my life so far. And I'm actually in class with Elma and others who are present here. And the most important thing I noticed was, like, as engineers, we try to solve problems with no human touch behind it. I'm not just saying from the perspective of designing products, it's also the kind of points that are used to evaluate products or anything for that matter. Now, being part of Smart City was an eye-opening thing for me, that there's an added dimension of human touch in addition to engineering towards doing anything we want. So that's been the greatest thing so far. Especially I'm working with Dr. Michaels on trying to see how we can help in trying to solve the current COVID crisis. I mean, we can't solve it, but we can at least do what our part in trying to ease humanity's difficulties in relation to that. So yeah, I given, like, if I was left to my own devices, I would have never chosen such a topic because I would be too afraid to even touch it. Such topics with a socio-economic touch are always difficult for engineers to even grapple with, because we know, like, internally, that approaching such thing is messy. But I think the approach that's used in Dr. Michael's class is really good. By inviting people from different departments and working towards solving the problem together, we might be able to remove that messiness from the equation, or at least reduce it to some extent. So yeah, that's been an experience, and I've been learning ever since. Last 3 weeks, I'm hoping to learn a lot more by the end of this semester.
And Yati, you talked much, thank you for those comments, about how you've been influenced by perhaps students in the social sciences domain, in the human sort of interaction domain. What do you think engineers bring to the table? What are you giving to the other side? What do you think you are as a systems engineer?
Okay, so this is from the talks that I've been listening. So what I think of engineers is the guy who makes the tool. By tool, I mean he's the guy who makes the stick. Now the stick can be waved the way you want. You can use it to fight, or you can use it to help accomplish anything. Now, the thing is, from the discussions here, I do understand that people are obsessed with how the stick looks, how beautiful it is, and how heavy it is, how much damage it can do. Now, the thing is, by working with people on the human dimension side, you actually know how to control the stick properly and who should actually wave the stick in what particular situations. So that's how I say it.
Well, thank you so much. I know you've just landed in Arizona recently, but I thank you, and I look forward to seeing where the end of your studies will go to. It's wonderful to talk to hardcore engineers, because often we think it's about sides, you know, the social scientist and the engineer and this and the technical and the non-technical. Actually, in the class, we're trying to do this and increase our fluency. You've already got someone saying a thank you there on the chat window, Yati.
Thank you, Toby.
I want to move to Martin, who actually does, from memory, have a bachelor's. Is it Martin Perez Cosimo? Is it a Bachelor of Engineering you have? No? Tell us.
Bachelor in Chemistry.
Ah, that's right. Can you talk to us about how you found your way into human and social dimensions?
Actually, was because I was like doing chemistry. Because when I was like studying sciences, I found fascinating a lot of the ideas and perspective, but I found more fascinating the history of science initially, and then like how that history happens today. Because with that, total history is about like big men, like in the 18th and 19th century, like creating and constructing first molecules, but then like devices and artifacts and laws and theories. But then there is like a shift in the 20th century that like I'm starting to like be very, very interested. First, because it started to disappear, those big names, or became more rare. And second, because those big names are still being like from the US or from the UK and are mostly men. And it's like, but also science happens around me. Like my faculties, my professors, and particularly my woman professors was like living and doing and working on that. And I was like, there is like something off here. And in that way, I start to be more interested in science policy first, but then in technology policy and technology governance, and that relationship that we have between science, technology, and society. That happens during my, I was doing my master thesis in chemistry too, but in quantum chemistry. And I was like having like a lot of struggles with my advisor, because the way that I conceive science as like a collective dynamic process of ideas was completely dismissing his own understanding of science as like a just sole person working in like a project and doing and creating truth. And because I was like very compelled to like work with like these computational models and simulating molecules, I was like asking a lot about like what actually it's more important to do. And because I come from Chile, I was like really interested to understand why Chile need to do science and technology, what regulations and what questions we are allowed to have, and what futures we're enabled to create that aren't imported for other places. And I dedicate 7 years of my life lecturing in Chile in these topics, because it was like an emerging group of like faculties. At that moment, they arrived just with like PhDs, mostly from Europe. mostly from sociology or anthropology, that they were like very connected with like science and technology studies. But at the same time, in 2014, I had the privilege to travel to the first Perez that has been, that is like the conference of the Society of Social Studies of Science, that despite the name, like also focus a lot on technologies and design, and has like a lot of experimental practices that are wonderful, and in some way are like the basic community from like the human and social dimensions. That means like STS is something that like everybody in HSD knows, but it's not the only thing that we do. And I think that community has a lot of transformations in the recent years, in particular about like make the same questions that I was doing about like chemistry 10 years ago, about like why we just talk about MEMS from Europe and the US, and if technology is situated and happens all around the world. And why we talk just about large companies if technologies are used and deployed all around the places. And that questions are still like, I'm trying to still follow them. Recently, in the last Perez, that was virtual as this meeting, was based in Prague time because that they was like the host this year. But I lead a panel that was like about human technologies or humanitarian technologies and how we do a better work with technologies. And like was like a lot of projects about like apps and design, like similar to like the presentation that you show us from Matthew, but also about like other humanitarian projects with biotechs and surveillance and privacy, and projects about like building specific infrastructures in like remote places and isolated areas. And that question for me is fundamental today. It's like how we do that better worlds, for who do we do that better worlds, and what level of, how much we empower others to create their better world. And that I think with like Toby said earlier about like we need to democratize not just the ways of uses, but also the places we design and who is designing technologies has been my focus on the last 3 years in the program. I'm starting my 4th year, and part of like the PhD process is explore and like learn and like and discover and fail. And I has been involved the last 3 years with one project in the school, that is the Solar Spell initiative. But it's a fascinating educational project, but I discovered that part of my questions aren't easy to address in that project. And I'm moving now to like a more, I'm creating a separate project from scratch to like think about the same questions about like how we do a better worlds with technology. Yes. And for who. And I'm like looking more in like my region, Latin America, and also about like how we can like extend this conversation about public interest technologies in a way that is less colonial, that I think a lot of like intellectual projects of the US are, and it's more inclusive and more diverse. Because I think something that like I'm fascinated about like our relationship with technologies is how we easily constrain them to a specific like contingencies. Yes. We constrain them that to like in this moment to digital technologies or AI, and about like what is like Facebook and Google doing. But actually we have undergrads in ASU experimenting with AI. We have like people discussing ethics of AI in Australia, in Nigeria, in the European Union. And all those discussions are completely dismissed for like the shininess of like the MIT Media Lab or Silicon Valley. And I think that is something that I'm really committed to fight back. Mm-hmm. Because if we are like thinking about the impacts of technology, we need to like empower people to be able to follow the trajectories of those technologies, to understand the ways of engagement that we have. And that conversations, I think we have turned it extremely academically and not so much like democratic as other fields. And that is like when the histories of like science and technology studies helps me to think about like, I think we have a lot of work to democratize those ideas that Toby just find like 20 years now, as she say, like in this program, to the common people. And part of my summer, and like actually yesterday we started a second cycle. I has been like doing a cycle with teachers of technology, initially in Chile and now a little more with Latin America, because there is like a course of technology that people do design and do programming and do like that things with kids, but they don't do any reflective work because they don't have the language, they don't have the readings, because like we have built a field centered in study cases and not in common concepts to share. Despite those common concepts exist, and they're like technology is never neutral, and technology is always situated, and we need to like follow like the technologies and the designs to like understand values are like appears, and that is a fascinating exercise. But I think people that we study technology and science, we have been very isolated of these conversations, because like the very nature of our inquiry, that is transdisciplinary and diverse and requires a lot of attention to bring people and ideas together. And I think that has me here now.
Well, Martin, you've been like one of our lifeblood students in the human and social dimensions, always a happy face to see, always encouraging, always giving people hints and links and connecting people with others. The amazing thing that you have is this very much this Chilean and Latin America focus, the bilingual, which Eusebio Sconovace is very good at, as well as he's counseled you in the past. What I'm going to do is ask you, perhaps Farah and Salah, because you are in another PhD program, the Innovation in Global Development, is to call you back. Farah, I know you've had seminars in between these talks, and Salah, you've been patient there for your time. I don't want to rush you both, because I actually think what Martin has begun talking about deserves probably a half an hour, not 30 seconds. And if you don't mind, I actually want to invite you back, not in the next one, because it's on COVID-19 responses led by Elisa Graffi, but in 2 weeks after that. I would love to have you back if your timetables allow. But what you bring in your awareness, because as you say, Latin America was so far ahead in so many things, Martin, and then we're playing catch up, and then there's not enough information, and then this disparity between the tech and the social science is exactly what Yati was talking about with Elma in class with the Smart City Infrastructure Program, but you're actually bringing a realism to it that is so unique and special, because I think you speak loudly for underrepresented minority groups, wherever they are in the world and whoever they are. So Martin, thank you so much for that introduction to your work. And to thank everyone. Whom have we got here? We've still got 15 participants. Thank you again to our organizers on the logistics side, Melissa and Cindy. Thank you, Toby, of course, Martin and Elma. Eusebio, you're incredible for always turning up, from the University of Baltimore. Erica O'Neill, we haven't met you, but I hope we see you again. Farah, thank you again. Jumana, our initial keynote speaker. Nicole Stevenson, one of our speakers from last week, who's an incredible consultant in Ground Up Consulting. Mohammed Ibrahim, who works closely with Jason Sargent. Shalon, thank you. Salah, always, thank you for your patience, incredible patience, and Yati. Have a lovely day, everyone, and we will make these recordings available to you, because I think particularly in the first hour and 3/4, and then our student testimonials at the end for the research program might help other students thinking about plunging their life into public interest tech and human and social dimensions and innovation in global development. Have a brilliant day, everyone, and thank you for the wonderful positive commentary here. Bye, everyone.